Have you ever walked into a grocery store and noticed that everything seems more expensive, even though you're not buying more than usual? The shelves aren't empty. There's no mad rush of people panic buying. Everything looks completely normal. And yet, your bill is 20% higher than it was last year. Here's what nobody tells you. Prices can skyrocket even when demand feels totally ordinary. Even when stores aren't packed. Even when nobody's fighting over the last bag of rice. And the reason why? It's way more interesting than most people realize. Because what drives prices isn't always what you think, and once you understand this, you'll see the economy completely differently. Let me paint you a picture. It's a regular Tuesday. You go to the store, you buy the same things you always buy. Milk, bread, eggs, chicken. Nothing fancy, nothing unusual. But when you get to the checkout, the total makes you do a double take. $50. For stuff that cost you $35 just 6 months ago. You look around. The store isn't crowded. There's plenty of stock on the shelves. Nobody's hoarding anything. Everything seems completely normal. So why are prices up 40%? If demand isn't crazy, if supply looks fine, why are you paying so much more? This is the question that confuses millions of people. Because we've been taught a simple story. Prices go up when demand goes up. Prices go down when demand goes down. Supply and demand. Simple, right? Except, that's not the whole story. Not even close. Here's what's really happening. There are hidden forces pushing prices higher that have nothing to do with whether you personally want to buy more stuff. Forces that work in the background. Forces that most people never see or understand. And these forces can make your cost of living explode even when you're not buying anything different. Even when nobody around you seems to be buying more either. The first hidden force is what I call the supply shock squeeze. This is when the problem isn't that people want more. It's that there's suddenly less available. And when there's less available, prices jump. Even if demand stays exactly the same. Think about it this way. Imagine there's 100 loaves of bread at the store, and 100 people who want to buy bread. Perfect balance. Bread costs $3. Now imagine a drought hits wheat-growing regions. Suddenly, there's only 70 loaves of bread. But there's still 100 people who want to buy bread. What happens? The price shoots up. Not because people suddenly want bread more, but because there's not enough to go around. The people who really need bread will pay more. The people who are going to make sandwiches might skip it. The price rises until it reaches a new balance. Maybe bread is now $5. Demand didn't change. You still want the same amount of bread, but supply dropped, and that's enough to send prices soaring. Here's a concrete example. During the pandemic, semiconductor chips became scarce, not because everyone suddenly wanted more computers, but because factories shut down, supply chains broke, production stopped. Suddenly, there weren't enough chips for all the cars, phones, and computers that manufacturers wanted to make. The price of chips skyrocketed. Even though consumer demand for electronics was pretty normal, this rippled through the entire economy. Cars got more expensive because they couldn't get chips. Electronics got pricier. Even appliances that use computer chips saw price increases. You, as a regular consumer, weren't demanding more, but you were paying more, because somewhere far away, a supply shock hit. And here's the cruel part. Supply shocks can last for years. It's not like flipping a switch. Building new factories takes time. Training new workers takes time. Fixing broken supply chains takes time. So even after the initial shock passes, prices can stay elevated for a long time. Because supply takes forever to recover. The second hidden force is what I call the input cost cascade. This one's sneaky, because it shows how a price increase in one thing can ripple through everything else. Even things that seem totally unrelated. Here's how it works. Almost everything you buy requires inputs to make. Raw materials, energy, transportation, labor. All of these are inputs. When the cost of any major input goes up, the cost of everything that uses that input goes up too. Like dominoes falling. Let's say oil prices double. Suddenly, diesel fuel costs way more. That means trucking companies pay more to transport goods, so they charge more for shipping. Now, every product that gets shipped by truck gets more expensive. Groceries, furniture, clothes, electronics, all of it. But it doesn't stop there. Factories use energy to run their machines. More expensive oil means more expensive electricity and heating. So, manufacturing costs go up, products get pricier, farmers use diesel to run tractors and equipment, fertilizer is made from natural gas. When energy prices rise, farming gets more expensive, food prices jump, plastic is made from oil, so anything made with plastic, packaged in plastic, or shipped in plastic containers gets more expensive. You see the cascade? One input cost increase spreads through the entire economy, like ink dropped in water. It touches everything. And here's what makes this feel so weird. You're not buying more food. You're not buying more plastic. You're not using more electricity. Your demand is completely normal, but you're paying more for everything. Because somewhere upstream, an input cost exploded, and that explosion rippled down to you. Think about fertilizer prices in 2022. Natural gas prices spiked because of the war in Ukraine. Fertilizer is made from natural gas, so fertilizer prices tripled. Farmers had to pay 3 times as much for fertilizer, so they charged more for crops. Food manufacturers paid more for ingredients. Grocery stores raised prices. You walked into the store buying the exact same groceries you always bought, but your bill was way higher, not because you wanted more food, but because an input cost, far removed from you, went crazy. The third hidden force, and this one's fascinating, is what I call the expectation spiral. This is pure psychology, and it's incredibly powerful. Because once people expect prices to rise, those expectations actually make prices rise, even if there's no other reason for it. Here's how this works. Imagine you're a business owner. You hear news about inflation. You read that prices are going up everywhere. You start thinking, well, my costs are probably going to go up soon. My suppliers will raise prices. My employees will ask for raises. Everything's getting more expensive. So what do? You raise your prices. Not because your costs have actually gone up yet, but because you expect them to. You're getting ahead of it. Now multiply this by millions of businesses, all doing the same thing, all raising prices because they expect costs to rise. And guess what? When everyone raises prices, costs actually do rise. Your suppliers raise their prices on you. Your employees see everything getting more expensive, so they demand higher wages. You have to pay more. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The expectation of inflation creates actual inflation. Here's the really interesting part. You, as a consumer, might not be demanding more. You might not even have more money. But you're paying higher prices anyway, because businesses are pricing based on expectations, on fear, on predictions about the future, not on actual current supply and demand. Think about rent increases in 2021 and 2022. Landlords saw news about inflation. They saw other landlords raising rents. They expected their costs to go up, so they raised rents, sometimes by 20 or 30%. Not because demand for apartments suddenly exploded, not because there was a housing shortage in their specific building, but because the expectation of inflation was everywhere. And expectations are contagious. You, as a renter, weren't demanding more housing. You weren't trying to rent 2 apartments, but your rent went up anyway, because your landlord expected inflation and acted on that expectation. The fourth hidden force is what I call the monopoly markup. This one makes people uncomfortable because it reveals something we don't like to admit. Sometimes, prices rise simply because companies can get away with it. Here's the thing. In a truly competitive market, companies can't just raise prices whenever they want. If they do, customers go to competitors. Competition keeps prices in check. But many industries aren't truly competitive anymore. They're dominated by a handful of big players. And when you only have a few choices, companies have pricing power. They can raise prices. And you can't do much about it because where else are you going to go? Think about groceries. In many areas, 2 or 3 chains control most of the market. If they all raise prices, what are you going to do? Drive 50 miles to find a cheaper store? Or internet service? Most people have 1, maybe 2 real options for high-speed internet. If both raise prices, you're stuck. You need internet. You'll pay what they charge. Or cell phone service. A few big carriers control the market. They can raise prices together, and customers have limited alternatives. Here's what happens during inflationary times. Companies see an opportunity. Everyone expects prices to rise. There's confusion about what things should cost. It's the perfect cover. So companies raise prices more than their costs actually increased. They pad their margins, they boost their profits, and they blame it on inflation. Consumers can't easily tell if the price increase is justified or not. Is the company just passing along higher costs? Or are they price gouging? It's hard to know. Studies have shown that during recent inflation, many large corporations increased their profit margins significantly. Not just their revenues, their margins, meaning they were charging proportionally more above their costs. You walk into the store. Demand is normal, supply looks normal. But prices are way up. Partly because of real cost increases, but also partly because companies realized they could get away with charging more. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't just decide not to buy food, or internet, or heating. These aren't optional luxuries, they're necessities. So even though your demand is totally normal, you're paying inflated prices because companies with market power are using inflation as cover to boost profits. The fifth hidden force is what I call the money supply effect. This one's more technical, but it's incredibly important because it shows how government policy can make everything more expensive, even when nobody's spending more. Here's the simple version. The amount of money in the economy matters. If there's suddenly way more money floating around, but the same amount of stuff to buy, prices go up. Think of it like this. Imagine an economy with $100 total and 10 products for sale. Each product costs about $10. Now imagine the government prints another $100. Suddenly there's $200 in the economy, but still only 10 products. What happens? People have more money to spend. They bid up the prices of those 10 products. Maybe products now cost $20 each. Your demand didn't change. You still want one product, but you're paying twice as much because there's more money competing for the same goods. This is exactly what happened during and after the pandemic. Governments around the world injected trillions of dollars into their economies. Stimulus checks, business loans, expanded unemployment, money printing by central banks. All that new money entered the economy, but production of actual goods and services didn't increase by the same amount. In fact, production decreased because of shutdowns. More money chasing fewer goods. Classic recipe for inflation. You as an individual might not have changed your spending habits at all, but prices went up anyway, because the total money supply exploded. And here's the tricky part. This kind of inflation feels really unfair, because your income might not have gone up. You didn't get a stimulus check, or maybe you got a small one, but prices went up for everyone. You're buying the same things with the same income, but paying more, because monetary policy flooded the economy with cash, and that cash had to go somewhere. But here's what nobody wants to admit. All of these forces can hit at the same time, and when they do, inflation can spiral out of control. Even when individual demand feels completely normal. You're not buying more groceries, your neighbor's not buying more gas, your coworker's not buying more clothes. Everyone's consumption feels normal. But supply shocks are reducing what's available. Input costs are cascading through the economy. Expectations are causing businesses to raise prices preemptively. Companies with market power are boosting margins. And excess money is chasing goods. All of these forces are invisible to you. You just see the prices going up, and it feels random, unfair, confusing, because you're thinking about demand from your personal perspective. Am I buying more? Are people around me buying more? The answer is no. But the economy is way more complex than individual demand. It's about supply, about costs, about expectations, about market power, about money supply. And all of those can push prices higher even when demand looks and feels totally normal. Let me tell you about two people. Both noticed prices rising. Both had the same income, but they responded very differently. First, there's David. David saw prices going up. His grocery bills increased, gas got more expensive, his rent jumped. David got frustrated. He thought, this doesn't make sense. I'm not buying more. Nobody I know is buying more. Why are prices up? He assumed it was temporary. A blip. Things would go back to normal soon. So he didn't change anything about his finances. He didn't ask for a raise because he thought the inflation was short-term. He didn't adjust his budget because he expected things to stabilize. He didn't look for ways to reduce costs because he figured prices would come back down. A year later, prices were still high. In fact, they'd gone even higher. David was now struggling. His savings were depleted. His credit card debt was growing. He was behind on bills. He kept waiting for things to go back to normal, but they didn't. The inflation stuck around, and David was now in a worse financial position than ever. Now let me tell you about Rachel. Rachel saw the same price increases, same grocery bills, same gas prices, same rent, but Rachel understood something David didn't. She understood that prices can rise even when demand is normal. She understood the hidden forces at work. So she didn't wait for things to go back to normal. She took action. She negotiated a raise at work. She explained to her boss that her cost of living had increased significantly. She documented the inflation. She made a case. She got an 8% raise. She adjusted her budget. She found areas to cut. She switched to cheaper alternatives for some products. She shopped at different stores. She reduced waste. She protected her purchasing power. She didn't just accept the higher prices. She adapted. She responded strategically. A year later, Rachel was doing okay. Not great. Inflation still hurt, but she had kept pace with it. Her income had gone up. Her spending was optimized. She wasn't drowning in debt. The difference between David and Rachel wasn't luck. It wasn't that Rachel had more money to start with. They were in similar situations. The difference was understanding. Rachel understood that prices can rise for reasons beyond individual demand. She understood the forces at work, and she responded accordingly. David waited for normalcy to return. Rachel adapted to the new reality. Here's what most people don't realize. Inflation driven by supply-side forces is different from inflation driven by demand, and it requires different responses. When inflation is driven by demand, it often means the economy is hot. Jobs are plentiful. Wages are rising. Eventually, things balance out. But when inflation is driven by supply shocks, input costs, expectations, monopoly power, or money supply, it can persist even in a weak economy. Even when people are struggling, you can have high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. You can have slow growth and rising prices. It's called stagflation, and it's brutal, because the normal tools for dealing with inflation, like raising interest rates, can make the economy even worse. They can kill jobs without bringing prices down much. This is why understanding the hidden forces matters, because it changes how you should respond personally. If you're waiting for demand to slow and prices to fall, you might be waiting forever. Because demand isn't the problem. Supply is. Costs are. Expectations are. Market power is. Money supply is. And none of those things fix themselves quickly. Understanding this gives you power. You can negotiate for higher wages. You can adjust your spending strategically. You can make different choices about where to live, what to buy, how to work. You're not at the mercy of forces you don't understand. You see what's happening. You see the hidden mechanisms pushing prices higher, and you can act accordingly. When you hear about inflation on the news, pay attention to why it's happening. Is it a supply shock? Oil prices? Semiconductor shortage? Labor shortage? Is it input costs? Energy prices? Raw material costs? Transportation costs? Is it expectations? Are businesses raising prices preemptively? Are workers demanding higher wages before costs actually rise? Is it market power? Are a few big companies controlling prices in certain industries? Is it money supply? Did the government flood the economy with cash? Understanding the source of inflation helps you predict how long it will last and how to respond. Supply shocks eventually resolve but can take years. Input cost inflation can reverse if the input prices fall. Expectation-driven inflation can become entrenched and last a long time. Monopoly power pricing sticks around until regulation or competition changes. Money supply inflation takes time to work through the system. Each source requires different strategies for protecting yourself. Prices rising when demand feels normal isn't a mystery. It's not random. It's not unexplainable. It's the result of specific, identifiable forces. Supply shocks, input cost cascades, expectation spirals, monopoly markups, money supply expansion. These forces work in the background, invisible to most people, but incredibly powerful. And they can push prices sky high even when you're buying the exact same things you've always bought. Even when stores are calm and shelves are stocked. Even when everything looks normal. The question isn't whether these forces exist. They do. The question is whether you understand them well enough to protect yourself. Because the people who thrive during inflationary times aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones who understand what's really happening, who see beyond the surface, who adapt their strategy to the actual causes, not the apparent symptoms. Once you see these hidden forces, you can't unsee them. You'll notice supply disruptions. You'll spot input cost increases before they hit consumer prices. You'll recognize expectation-driven pricing. You'll identify monopoly power. You'll track money supply. And that understanding becomes your advantage, your tool for navigating an economy that confuses everyone else. Demand might feel normal, but prices can still rise. And now you know why.